Fred Dashevsky back. What's up, my man?
Hey, how are we doing today, Dr. Dean?
As always, wonderful. As always, lovely, lovely, lovely. How are you feeling in the last week or two or so of all this? They call it chaos, but the market is right back up to where it's supposed to be. Not saying that that's a proper market and there isn't money being printed, but he just keeps bragging about the tariffs and the money rolling in. What do you see?
Well, what I'm seeing is exactly what you started off with, which is this uncertainty that's being created by every country not exactly knowing what to expect. And all of the industries are trying to, game this out and trying to figure out whether or not they're going to be hit next with tariffs. And, I just expect that we're going to end up, that will translate for Americans into we'll be paying higher prices for an awful lot of goods until this all settles out. In theory, tariffs should be more leveled. The trade imbalances are certainly an issue worth reviewing. Whether or not it was something that required this amount of chaos in order to get done, I guess that will be a debate that will go on for a number of years. But, a lot of people are kind of uncomfortable with how President Trump has gone about this. But I think his goal to try to reduce these trade gaps is certainly viable. I think in the end, this will probably settle down. I have a feeling a few months from now, when these negotiations are a little bit more resolved and there's less of this day-to-day volatility, people are going to kind of forget about the fact of how disruptive this was.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because I've always read behind the scenes, China is held up by us. He continues to say China doesn't have the cards; they're not going to. But on top of that, you have now out of nowhere, NVIDIA. Obviously, there's a lot of chips made in Taiwan, but obviously China's involved as well. NVIDIA decides to come over. You have these SoftBanks coming over. Apple, I think they're going to do something with the phone itself in India, but they're coming over. He's kind of forcing their cards. Pharmaceuticals now too. He just talked today about we cannot have, and he's talked about this for a while, but today was we cannot have drugs made in other countries, especially if there's wars. It all has to come into the U.S. So you're seeing this influx. I'm not saying he's forcing these companies to make moves into the U.S., but it's kind of like he has the cards and he knows that they don't. This may last a few months, but this feels like within the next couple of years, we could be going through an economic boom just from a manufacturing and a workforce standpoint, correct?
Well, that would be the goal, right? So in theory, the idea of trying to level out the trade issue is to try to create more manufacturing directly here in the U.S. Okay, so currently, we all recognize that many foreign countries produce goods and services a lot cheaper than we do domestically. And that creates a market for their products here for Americans. It offers them an opportunity, an option to buy something cheaper made out of China than something domestically built. Now, if we even out the balance of pricing by including tariffs on the goods that are imported from China, the hope is that the manufacturing costs here in America won't look so different than that cheaper product now coming out of China, because the price has now been increased by the tariff. And if we level the playing field, that Americans would choose to buy an American-made product as opposed to a cheaper China product, because now it'll come down to quality. And I think, we've produced better quality products here in America than most of the stuff that we import. But in one way, one of the things you said about how Trump looks at China, I think he recognizes the fact that their entire economy is based upon export.
Right.
So they have to sell their goods and services, and we are by far their biggest consumer. We're their biggest customers. So they definitely have a negotiation kind of an angle here that they want to make sure that we will still continue to buy their goods and services. If we end up with a slowdown here because everybody is cutting back, or we don't get these goods coming from these foreign countries, and the manufacturing has not yet picked up in America, we may have a gap there for a while, and that could create an economic slowdown. So we may experience that first. And for the last few months, it seems like recession was really a big fear. If you looked at the Wall Street guys and what they were talking about, they were kind of worried that all this slowing of the economy could end up stalling the U.S. Right now, what they're seeing is more of a, and I hate to use this word again, but that's stagflation. So you get inflation growing, but you don't have an economic growth to match it or absorb all that additional capital. And I think that's where we're heading now. So we have to hope that this really, in the end, pays off by actually increasing that manufacturing of goods and services here domestically. And again, that he somehow levels the playing field to make us more competitive price-wise to the cheaper goods that are being imported from the foreign countries.
What if 250th year anniversary next year, next July, from my understanding, right? Could we slide a gold standard in? Could that rock the whole day? I am determined to get this gold standard back in, Fred.
I like it. Well, we should try to do everything that we can to sort of get that support going. I mean, anything that would stabilize the U.S. dollar's value is critical, because look what's happened. The dollar has been fading and fading, and we've seen the response, of course, in things like the price of gold, which hit a 2-week high again today. We're again getting relative movement in the metals as when you look at the metals prices, they relatively express the inverse of the U.S. dollar's strength around the world. So the weaker we make the U.S. dollar, the more expensive gold gets in dollar terms. And of course, China faces the same problem. If they weaken their currency, it can help their exports. But when countries are manipulating their currencies in order to increase trade, it's really very difficult because you already have enough manipulation going on in a fiat currency. Now you're adding, an option here where countries are doing it on purpose. They're not just dealing with the after effects of what's happening in their economies. They're actually purposefully making their currencies weaker in order to help their export situation. So now the dollar is facing this, bizarre world of trying to exist within a world economy where, number one, people are still getting aggravated with the U.S. and more countries are lining up to move away from it. There were those 11 new countries who lined up and said, we're going to try to stop using
how do you
US
keep
dollar.
it? How do you keep a dollar as a world reserve currency if you're not taking imports in from other countries, especially
That's
like
going to be a big problem, right? If enough countries decide to start trying to utilize another currency besides the U.S. dollar, we're going to face a substantial problem. And it's going to be huge because the dollar's support around the world is what retains its relative strength. It's not because we have such a great economy or because it's backed by gold and silver. We know it's not. So the relative strength of the dollar is based upon the kind of the forethought of what do we look like going forward comparatively to the rest of the world. And if everybody's manipulating their currencies in order to make trade agreements work or to make the exports better for their particular countries, we're in a very strange dynamic. So this is creating volatility that has, raised the value of the dollar against world currencies, then subsequently lowered it. And again, we're getting the reflection of that in the up and down movement in the metals prices. So we're in a very strange economic environment. I mean, it's like nothing is like it used to be in the days of, the old economists. You look at the concepts that existed in the 70s and the 60s and even the 80s, it's hard to apply them to the current markets because things don't evolve slowly the way they did back then. It took years and years and years for things to happen in the economies decades ago. Now it's weeks or one tweet.
It's like overnight, man.
Yeah.
I mean, it's well, and then you have, I don't know if you saw this. I mean, I remember you showed me the Dakota one, but I don't know if it's signed yet, but they were talking about it last week going to the governor's desk, but
Wyoming, and they did.
Wyoming did, but Florida was supposedly signing a gold and silver legal tender bill.
That would be awesome. So the more of those that exist, the more opportunity Americans have to have an alternative to where they can use gold and silver to operate. Again, functionally, I think it should be easier to get that accomplished than it would be, if they've made any kind of movement forward in cryptos. They certainly should be able to do it with gold and silver. It seems like it would be a lot easier.
Do you see that? Now, I don't know because I didn't grow up in this. And I mean, not that you're that much older than I am, but when they say a gold and silver legal tender, for example, in Florida, I know they're pretty much pushing it through because I went to his desk and I don't think he's going to turn it away. I maybe I'm wrong. I don't see people literally taking silver and gold physically out and going to Whole Foods and handing it to somebody or whatever. Is this just a new digital version of that, backed by the hard metal that can be shipped back and forth in a slow way?
That would be the way I would think it would work. But the idea of giving something the status of legal tender,
Right.
it means you have a right to use it as currency.
Correct.
So the legal tender status of, gold coins or silver coins from pre-1964 silver and pre-33 gold, is relatively important, because it means that you have a right as an American to use that. Now, of course, you're not going to take a $20 gold coin that's worth $4,000 and spend it as $20 because that's its legal tender status.
Right. Except for the old guy who is set in his ways and he takes in the gold coin. He says, "You have to take this." I mean, the outliers obviously, but the average person's not going to do that.
No, of course not. But the idea of establishing the standard and making it legitimately legal to utilize it, they'll come up with a process, and I'm sure it'll either be a digital or representation value, that something will be able to be utilized to be able to conduct commerce within the markets and have that used by the value of gold and silver as its support. I think that's a great thing for these states to move forward on, because at least it gives you an option. You may not choose to do it. You may choose to continue to operate the way you do now with your credit cards and write checks and send wires and however you make your payments with Apple Pay and all that. But if you had a choice, you might just meet somebody, let's say like me, who might say, well, yes, you could pay me in gold and silver and we can conduct our business. Let's say you want to buy a car. And I say, yeah, I'll take your $20 gold coins, your silver dollars. The thing is, by denominating it as legal, that means that the contract between these two parties would actually be legitimate, as opposed to the possibility that if you conduct commerce in something that doesn't have a legitimate legal status, the point is that somebody could argue that the contract was never really fulfilled.
Right.
And that leaves a whole bunch of legal issues, especially when it comes to things like real estate. It could get very complicated.
Sure.
So you have to establish.
You're going to need the digital infrastructure to carry this out.
Yes. And you're going to need some sort of backing by some sort of defined agency like a state that's going to say, yes, this is legitimate. And therefore, if you do conduct commerce within these worlds of gold and silver, you are fulfilling all the legal obligations of the contract that we want. So I think it's really interesting.
It sounds like blockchain right there. That's what that sounds like.
Yeah. Well, you look at the blockchain helps, of course, to define the transactions as we move between me and you and the next guy to make sure that those were all legitimate. And that technology, I think, is huge. And the concept can be rolled over in a lot of different fashions. They might use that as the boilerplate for how to establish the gold and silver markets as a legitimate form of currency. But I'd be curious, I read the Wyoming bill. It was kind of vague. Basically what they said is that the state will start stockpiling gold and silver. And what they're going to do is to utilize that as a way of sustaining the value of pension accounts and things that the state invests in, but also allow the public within the states to conduct commerce within that market of gold and silver. So I'd be curious if Florida is pushing towards this. I haven't read the bill for Florida yet, so
I haven't read the whole thing either. I got to take time to.
But
they're also pushing for a Bitcoin reserve bill too.
Well, all these things are going to create problems for the dollar. So if they get acceptance on a wider basis, we still have this fundamental problem that it is only acceptance of the dollar worldwide that supports its value for us. If we lose that status, I am more concerned about that than the economic environments that we go through, like the recessions, or, if we happen to have a stagflation environment or even an inflationary environment, we can survive that. But if the dollar really begins to fade and people around the world just say, that's it, between the usefulness of the dollar as a weapon, which Trump has already used. Now we're going to move it into a situation where he's targeting our friends with, trade problems and tariffs. If we eventually get to that point where we just aggravate everybody, what's to stop the rest of the world from sitting there saying, why do we want to play with these guys? We don't have to.
He just signed a deal. They agreed on a deal today. I don't know if it's signed today. Just moments ago, maybe an hour ago, agreed to the deal with a mineral rights deal with Saudi Arabia. With the, I'm sorry,
Okay.
with the new crown prince there that he gets along with. So is it UAE or I think it's Saudi Arabia? Just signed it. I don't know what they're doing, but I mean, these guys are he's making deals with these countries over minerals. I mean, he did the same thing with Zelensky the last couple of weeks ago. He's still calling for Denmark and Canada. I mean, this is talk about kind of it's the 2025 version of grabbing your land, right?
Yeah.
And everything's up for grabs.
So with everything up for grabs, nothing is settled, nothing is certain. There was an interesting report on one of the news broadcasts this morning how a couple of the states up in the Northwest were promoting people in Canada to come do business with them. They're like, listen, we understand that there's this national thing going on, but we just want you folks to know, don't stop coming to America, because apparently Europeans are not coming to America in the same numbers they were a year ago, and Canadians are not coming to America in the same numbers. People are starting to almost boycott coming to the U.S. because, again, we're aggravating people around the world. And I just wonder how far you can, poke the bear until you get to that point where enough people turn around and say, you know what, you and I want to get together and see if we can figure out how to conduct commerce without these guys. Perhaps we can come up with a way to do business and we don't need them. And then they'll be left on their own. And if we have a domestic issue where we can only support the U.S. dollar domestically and we can't get the foreign investors to participate, Jason, we got a big problem.
What if he does something to make America the shiny beacon in the hill again, and all these countries go from we don't like America anymore because we don't like the way we're running stuff to, oh my gosh, they're the world leaders again from a standpoint of manufacturing and everything else. Does that also, the leader kind of sets an example potentially, and all of a sudden Europe goes, oh, we better kind of do our thing. And China, I mean, in a way, it could change China forever. China could actually China would actually have to support themselves, actually support their people again. Imagine if they went away from communism.
Well, I mean,
it's a reach, it's a dream. I'm just saying.
Yeah, I don't see how China's economics would support itself if they can't export their goods. Right. That's how their entire economy is based. I mean, it's it's the fundamental basis of their entire economy. So that would be really challenging. So I wonder about that. And again, the more that we move away from having the U.S. as the world's reserve currency, the more problematic this gets. Now, if we end up with Trump as a strong leader and Europe says, hey, this guy's got his act together and, I get what he's doing and we're just going to have to fold and, accept the idea that we're going to balance out these little tariff problems and negotiate. I think in the end, that would create strength in the dollar. Just from a psychological standpoint, these foreign countries would be more willing to say, okay, we're going to stockpile U.S. dollars again because we see it does have viability to it. And remember, we've laughed about how the dollar's, the cleanest dirty shirt in laundry, and that's a horrible reason for somebody to want your currency. But, in the end, that still is the case because every other country is still facing the same kind of fiat money problems. They're all inflating the value of their currency. So it would be good for us if the world looked at us in that better light, as opposed to what the hell's going on in America? Is this guy just off the rails? And is he just creating problems? And do we want to deal with this? I mean, is there a way around it? Again, I'm really worried about poking this problem to the level where we really get to a point people just want to disengage with conducting commerce with the dollar. Right now they can't because we still have, that lock hold. We still have that control, but we could lose that.
100%. Well, whether we lose it or not, transition into what do you do, Fred? What do you do to leverage your money to, give time to your money? I mean, I use gold and silver. What do you use?
Yeah, I do the same thing. I mean, I've been doing it like that for about 40 years. For that reason is that, all these questions that are raised about the future value of paper money always bring me back to the idea of why we had gold and silver as an original form of currency and the standard for money that we wanted to have forever. The concept was that, the public would not be subject to changes in the value of their money because of these political issues and things that they have no control over. The average person in your neighborhood can't do much about trade negotiations with China.
Right.
You know, they have no impact, right? There's nothing they can do or say that's going to alter whatever happens there. Yet, they're subject to the onslaught of the results of what happens with these types of issues. And I find that problematic for a country to have a currency issue where you're so subject to changes in its value from forces that are outside of your control. And that was never intended to be the case. The concept was supposed to be that the public always retain control of the value of money. And the Federal Reserve's job as central bank, is to sustain growth, maintain an even economy, and sustain the value of the dollar. But, we can look at what's happened to the dollar since 1913 when the Fed was instituted to take over. They have lost so much value down to maybe 4 cents in terms of original value on the dollar from 1913. Even from 2020, we've lost about 50% of the purchasing power of money in the US. And, I get it, I'm getting older, but 2020, it's 25 years, but 50% of the value of money is gone. And the problem is it doesn't come back. It begins to lose value. It tends not to come back the other way. So we can anticipate if prices have achieved higher levels, there may be some that retract a little bit. But in the end, we can continually expect to pay more and more for goods and services. And these trade tariffs will definitely raise prices in America.
Very, very interesting. Gold and silver, the way to go. What's new in the gold and silver world?
They are rocking. It's incredible to see gold at over $3,000 an ounce. I just think it's incredible.
Have you been busy out of this universe?
It's been a little crazy. Everybody is trying to get a handle on what to do. And, a lot of people we talk to are either retired or close to or planning for retirement age. And it's getting progressively more difficult to do that because the standard process that, was good and viable for decades really doesn't fly very well anymore. So I think people need a little additional protection these days. And I would encourage people, the nice thing about physical gold and silver is how it stabilizes the value of your money. So whatever portion of your wealth you have in that, and the people that bought a couple of years ago, not only have they stabilized value, they've seen a really nice growth. The price of gold has really been going up quite well. Just a few years ago, we were at $1,600 to $1,800 gold, and then we hit that $2,200, $2,300 mark. We blew through $2,500. The next thing you know, we were approaching $3,000. Now we've been steadily over $3,000, and I think we are going to continue to see this trend. And there are those that are calling for silver, because to me, silver right now is way underpriced. The gold-silver ratio is 100 to 1. It takes 100 ounces of silver to buy 1 ounce of gold now. That's way out of line.
What should the legitimate price be right now of silver?
Well, historically, depending on how far back you go, it's about a 60 to 70 to 1 ratio. Recently, it's been about 80 to 1. That means either gold has to pull back to 2,600 or silver has to go to $40. I think it's going to be the latter.
$40. It's not a hard march from 33 right now to 40.
No, percentage-wise, it's a pretty big jump.
Yeah, we thought. Look at gold. Did we expect 3,400?
That's amazing. That's just amazing. I remember the days when we had $20 gold coins at Mint State 64 that were, $585 and went up to $650. And, people were saying, wow, it's $650. Is this still a good buy? And, today that coin is like $4,300. It's incredible how they continue to appreciate. But I think if we look in 5 years from now, these trade situations will have resolved.
Yep.
Things will have moved forward. The government debt will have exploded another several $1 trillion, and we'll probably be looking at gold, pushing $4,000 an ounce, and silver again in the 40s, and that will just become the normal standard. So I think people will do well to provide themselves a little peace of mind, having some of their wealth in gold and silver coins, and also from a standpoint of seeing an appreciation over the next several years. I'm not usually looking at it from that standpoint of actually profiting, more as wealth protection. But right now, I think we're going to get both in the next 5 years. So I would definitely say to those who haven't done it yet, start an accumulation program. begin to get aggressive about adding physical metals to your portfolio. And for those that have some, great time to add, because I think prices will continue to go up from here on the back of so many issues with the US dollar. We could just spend hours ripping into the problems with the US dollar.
Unreal. What's the number up there? What's the phone number?
1-800-878-COIN. That's 800-878-2646. And we'll be happy to answer any questions, help guide people that are new to this on how to do it properly. And also for those that are interested, we will, of course, physically provide you with the actual gold and silver. So we do actually deal in the physical product. For those that have not worked with us, this is not paper. This is not something that's stored by a third party. You, as the investor, get possession of the physical gold and silver. You own it. It's in your hands. Nobody can take it away from you. You can sell it when you want, to whom you want. And I think that's the way that you want to do this. I've watched too many issues with people who've done storage or other third-party deals. So I'm a big fan of direct physical possession to the investors. So reach us at 800-878-2646 with any questions. And for those that have a little capital they're sitting on, I would encourage you to move some of it out of that paper world and get into something physical.
I love it. Go give Fred a call, Donna a call. They're all great people. They're all wonderful. Everyone raves about you, Fred.
I love that.
Everyone raves about it.
Well, we've worked really hard to try to make sure that,
Capital.
we're just trying to provide information, and we find that those that have an open mind and look at this objectively kind of reach the same conclusion. So I find that part of it is pretty simple. And then we've been really diligent, of course, about the quality of the product we provide. I mean, I've spent the better part of my career isolating the best kind of gold and silver coins, physically the best examples we can get. And we've dealt with some really cool stuff. I mean, some of our clients own some super, super rare coins that are really interesting. And then a lot of them own just the basic, junk silver and standard $20 gold coins. So they have that flexibility. But there's some interesting stuff going on out there in that world. And definitely happy to help and glad to hear the good response from those that have worked with us.
As always, I love it. Have you back in a few weeks or so as the world continues marching on. Fred Dashevsky, US Coin Capital, uscoincapital.com. You see how capital spelled TOL, not TAL. TOL. Fred, I appreciate you, man.
Okay. Always great to be with you. I hope your audience is
one.
doing well, and I hope everybody's happy and healthy. And again, feel free to reach out to us.
Appreciate it always, everybody. I'll see you tomorrow, the 7th, live at noon Eastern Time. Head on over to drjasondean.com. Have a great day, everybody. Take care.